limit, man. Okay, calm down.
The second point is, and this is a much touchier question. You say the Palestinians, if Israel claims a right to self-defense, you say the Palestinians have the right to liberate themselves from a concentration camp. However, the obvious response is, well, when they liberated themselves, they went on as Amira Haas said today, on an orgy of violence. And I'm not going to dispute that. And I will confess to you, I'll speak candidly to you, that when the events of October 7th occurred, initially, you will recall, it was very unclear what happened. We knew there was a breakthrough in the fence. We knew civilians had been killed. The numbers were put at approximately 50 on the first day. We didn't know if Israel had exaggerated that figure, but there was clearly a significant number of people killed. And from that moment, and then thereafter, when more information became available, I would say, honestly, I was very torn about what verdict to render on these events. I want to distinguish for you listeners, there's the factual side, what exactly happened. And by the second or third day, it was clear something horrendous had happened.
In other words, not just breaking through the fence, more
Correct.
than, yeah.
Yes, there was, as Amira Haas said, an orgy of violence. There's no question about that. So the factual side, obviously we don't know all the details, and there are a lot of details to know. Whether that was an order by Hamas or whether the militants went mad, they're settling the score. How many were Hamas? How many were other people who broke through the fence and just decided to exact revenge? We don't know the details, but we know enough, okay? And we're not going to argue that. We're not going to argue it. I'm not going to try to find extenuations in the facts. I will accept, as I said, an atrocity of significant magnitude occurred. That's a factual question. But then comes the more complicated question. It's the moral judgment. And here I will acknowledge my fallibility. I have, over the whole of my adult life, since June 1982, I've invested myself in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And now as I look back, my life is coming to an end. I'm on the downside of the curve after midnight. And it was a huge investment of my life. I'm not trying to be a martyr about it. I'm just being factual about it. In a kind of division of labor developed between myself and Professor Chomsky, it wasn't formalized, but informally it was there. Namely, I was a very conscientious, fastidious, assiduous researcher. I collected the evidence to make the case, but I always deferred to Professor Chomsky for the moral judgment. Professor Chomsky was steeped, besides 10,000 other disciplines, he was steeped in moral philosophy, and also not just the Western tradition, in the Hebrew tradition. His father was a famous Hebraist, so I attached a huge amount of weight to his moral judgment. Number one, because of his sheer immersion in all of the relevant moral precepts and philosophical depth, not just precepts, and also because he's clearly a very morally serious person. Chomsky is incapable, he's constitutionally incapable of a morally trivial statement. It's not possible. No, I'm very serious about that. He takes his calling his life's calling very serious. So I always deferred to his judgment for reasons not worth delaying ourselves with now. I was not able to defer to his judgment. It wasn't available at this moment. And so you'll forgive the drama. I was left to my own devices. And I really didn't know how to proceed.
We were talking about when?
October 7th.
Okay, okay, got it. Right, yeah.
October 7th, 8th, 9th.
Okay.
I was on my own. And I knew, at the risk of sounding boastful, and it really is not boastful, I knew that many people were awaiting my judgment. And I was quite nervous about what to say. I didn't fear the consequences of what I would say.
You just want to get it right.
Thank you. Exactly. I wanted to get it right. And I didn't know which way to turn. A part of me, a voice inside, was, what would my parents say? And I'm pretty clear on what they would say, but I can't prove it because they've passed. So I then
What do you think they would say?
They would not condemn the Palestinians. They were in a concentration camp. My father was in Auschwitz. My mother was in Majdanek. They would never condemn people who were consigned and confined into a concentration camp. In fact, let's be clear, they were born into that concentration camp called Gaza. My parents had beautiful lives in their youth, which made what happened 10,000 times more painful. That's another story for another day.
Okay.
So I have no doubt they would be ashamed to condemn the people. Will they be happy with what happened? No.
Right.
Will they inside be tormented? Yes. Would they condemn it? No. 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 1,000 times I knew my parents. They would be ashamed to condemn it. I know that sounds very counterintuitive to say they would be ashamed to condemn it, whereas everybody expects they would be ashamed not to condemn it. No. No. I'm pretty confident of that. I have 2 siblings. They'll probably hear this broadcast. I don't think they would disagree with me on that point. I once asked my mother, how did you feel when you heard that large numbers of German civilians were being killed during the terror bombing of Germany? It's often forgotten. I'm not saying this in any extenuation. I'm just speaking again factually. The estimates are about 27 million Russians were killed. I guess they've lowered the figure. They're now saying 20 million Chinese were killed. The Japanese were absolutely ruthless. Monsters. And they killed about 20 million Chinese. In my day, the figure was 25 million, but I'm told it's been lowered. And the third largest figure was Germans. 9 million Germans were killed. So a large number of Germans were killed, overwhelmingly, obviously, civilians.
Dresden.
Well, it was carpet bombing, it was terror
Right.
bombing. They wanted to force the Germans to submit by terrorizing them into defeat. Again, I'm not passing any judgments, I'm just stating it. And I remember asking my mother, how did she feel? And she said, now my mother was a very humane person. If I have humane impulses, they came from her. She just looked at me and she said, our feeling was, if we are going to die, we're going to take some of them with us. She said it very flatly, unapologetically, but with no bravado. if we're going to die, we're going to take some of them with us. And guess what? On October 7th, that's what those folks who burst through the gates of Gaza did. If we're going to die, they knew it was their last night, last day. We're going to take some of them with us. Is it right? However, that wasn't sufficient for me. My parents had good moral judgment. However, it was not a moral judgment that was honed in confrontation with all of the moral, philosophical literature. I was faced with a dilemma, and then I thought to myself, let's go see what the abolitionists, the white abolitionists, had to say after Nat Turner's rebellion. I have in recent times read quite a lot of Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois. And both Douglass and Du Bois held the white abolitionists, the best known being Charles Sumner, Wendell Phillips, William Lloyd Garrison, but there were many others, Garrett Smith, but the three are the most well known. And if you read Douglass's works and you read Du Bois's work, they speak about these white abolitionists as if you were speaking about a deity. They held them in such high regard, such high esteem. And so, with that as a departure point, I went back, I looked at the Nat Turner Rebellion, and then I looked at what was the reaction of William Lloyd Garrison. He was the editor, as I suspect you know, of the famous anti-slave periodical, The Liberator. So, first a word about the rebellion itself. Nat Turner, it seems, was a very smart guy, like Frederick Douglass. I'm saying just his sheer intellect, it seems to have commanded a lot of respect. He was a slave, of course, but I'm just saying he was known to be very smart. He also happened to have been a crazed religious zealot.
Like John Brown.
Which I'm going to get to in a moment. Yes, since you said it, I'll just repeat you. Same thing with John Brown. Both of them believed that God had inspired them to carry out their rebellions and that every act they committed was sanctioned by God. You might call them premature jihadis, Nat Turner and John Brown. Now, when Nat Turner went on the rebellion, according to Stephen Oates, the very respected historian, he gave the order, Nat Turner gave the order to kill all whites. To kill all whites. And they did a pretty good job, if we can use that expression. They killed about 70 white men, women, children. It was, to quote Amira Haas, it was an orgy of violence. Okay, those are the bare facts, and your audience can certainly make the obvious comparison with the situation on October 7th. So now, having the bare facts available, the next thing is to turn to what did the abolitionists have to say about Nat Turner and the rebellion, not just about the rebellion itself.
The rebellion, right.
Yeah. And it happened that William Lloyd Garrison, in The Liberator, he expressed his opinion. Now, I asked you if you can just bring it up on the screen.
Sure.
Here it is, beginning in what we have so long predicted. I would kindly ask you, the abolitionists were very literate, and so their language is very sophisticated. So in order for the audience, your audience, to appreciate it, I would be grateful if you read it slowly and let the words sink in. I've already read it at least 5 times because it was so important to me to see how a moral judgment, a proper moral judgment, is formulated. So if you
Okay.
begin with what we have so long predicted, this is
Okay.
Garrison speaking.
William Lord Garrison. Okay. What we have so long predicted, at the peril of being stigmatized as an alarmist and disclaimer, has commenced its fulfillment. The first step of the earthquake, which is ultimately to shake down the fabric of oppression, leaving not one stone upon another, has been made. The first drops of blood, which are but the prelude to a deluge. Let me start again. The first drops of blood, which are but the prelude to a deluge from the gathering clouds, have fallen. The first flash of lightning, which is to smite and consume, has been felt. The first wailings of bereavement, which is to clothe the earth in sackcloth, have broken up our ears. The crime of oppression is national. The South is only the agent in this guilty traffic. But remember, the same causes are at work, which must inevitably produce the same effects. And when the contest shall have again begun, it must be again a war of extermination. In the present instance, no quarters have been asked or given. But we have killed and routed them. We can do it again and again. We are invincible.
Now, just as you're reading it, and you'll excuse me for interrupting you, he's now describing the Israelis after they have inflicted a massacre and another massacre and another massacre.
Okay.
Go ahead. But we have killed.
Okay. But we have killed and routed them. We can do it again and again. We are invincible. A dastardly triumph, well becoming a nation of oppressors. Detestable complacency that can think without emotion of the extermination of the blacks. We have the power to kill all. Let us, therefore, continue to apply the whip and forge new fetters. In his fury against the revolters, who will remember their wrongs? What will it avail them, though the catalogue of their sufferings, dripping with warm blood fresh from their lacerated bodies, be held up to extenuate their conduct? It is enough that the victim were black. That circumstance makes them less precious than the dogs which have been slain in our streets. They were black, brutes pretending to be men, legions of curses upon their memories. They were black. God made them to serve us.
Stop for one moment. I would ask you listeners to remember this passage when we hear Naftali Bennett in an interview that you're going to show.
Right.
They were black. How can you dare deny our right to kill them?
Ye patriotic hypocrites, ye panegyrists of Frenchmen, Greeks, and Poles, ye Faustian declaimers for liberty, ye valiant sticklers for equal rights among yourselves, ye haters of aristocracy, ye assailants of monarchies, ye republican nullifiers, ye treasonable disunionists, be dumb, cast no reproach upon the conduct of the slaves, but let your lips and cheeks wear the blisters of condemnation.
Yes, he's saying you condemn, you praise the heroism of the French.
Right.
You praise the heroism of the Greeks.
And their equal
you
rights, right?
You praise the heroism of the Poles. You praise the idea of liberty. And then when it comes to these people, the blacks, the tune suddenly changes.
Right. And they speak out against, or they condemn aristocracy, right? And monarchies.
Yes.
But, yeah.
And now he talks about the attacks on those who defend the black slave. Go ahead.
Ye accuse the Pacific Friends of emancipation of instigating the slaves to revolt. Take back the charge as a foul slander. The slaves need no incentives at our hands. They will find them in their stripes, in their emaciated bodies, in their ceaseless toil, in their ignorant minds, in every field, in every valley, on every hilltop and mountain, wherever you and your fathers have fought for liberty, in your speeches, your conversations, your celebrations, your pamphlets, your newspapers, voices in the air, sounds from across the ocean, invitations to resistance above, below, around them. What more do they need? Surrounded by such influences and smarting under their newly made wounds, is it wonderful that they should rise to contend, as other heroes have contended, for their lost rights? It is not wonderful. And wonderful in that sense doesn't mean amazing, right? It means
Right.
It means surprising. Yeah.
And bear in mind all the claims that Hamas, they propagandize these people to hate and to kill. And Garrison saying here, they don't need the propaganda. It's their real life experience
Right.
on a daily basis that's quite sufficient to create their hatred of their oppressors.
For ourselves, we are horror struck at the late tidings.
Okay, I want to just stop there for one
Yeah.
half moment. Here, Garrison is expressing his horror at the Nat Turner Revolt. We are horror struck at the late tidings. Continue.
Okay. For ourselves, we are horror struck at the late tidings. We have exerted our utmost efforts to avert the calamity. We have warned our countrymen of the danger of persisting in their unrighteous conduct. We have preached to the slaves the pacific precepts of Jesus Christ. We have appealed to Christians, philanthropists, and patriots for their assistance to accomplish the great work of national redemption through the agency of moral power, of public opinion, of individual duty. How have we been received? We have been threatened, prescribed, vilified, and imprisoned, a laughing stock and a reproach. Do we falter in view of these things? Let time answer. If we have been hitherto urgent and bold and denunciatory in our efforts, hereafter we shall grow vehement and active with the increase of danger. We shall cry in trumpet tones night and day, woe to this guilty land unless she speedily repent of her evil doings. The blood of millions of her sons cries aloud for redress. Immediate emancipation alone can save her from the vengeance of heaven and cancel the debt of ages.
And I write at the very end, the last line is mine.
It has to be noted, writes Norman Finkelstein, that whereas he stated that the excesses of the slaves could not be justified and he was horror struck at the late tidings, William Lloyd Garrison did not condemn the slave revolt.
Yes.
So they were not, it was not justifiable, but not condemnable.
You read it as I read it, and then you interpret it on your own. I read it as he recognized an atrocity occurred, but he would not, as I said, there is a difference between the factual acknowledgement and the moral judgment. The factual acknowledgement is like any definition of atrocity, an atrocity occurred. That's a factual statement. But there was no moral judgment cast on Nat Turner. Quite the contrary, the moral judgment was cast on those who allowed the situation to continue to prolong itself. The enslavement of the African American people. Now you have to acknowledge that was an incredibly principled position that Garrison took. He was told, don't go south because you're not going to come back. So when I read that statement by him, my appreciation of the abolitionist soared, because there were very few people after October 7th who were willing to say about the Israelis and the Palestinians what Garrison said about the whites and the African American slaves.
Because I'm just going to show I did not write an article like you did, but I do want to show these two things that I tweeted related to this. not to Nat Turner, because that's kind of where my mind went immediately after this when I was seeing all these people condemning Hamas and talking about Israelis. I don't think that people get that posting about the deaths of Israelis while having said nothing about the systemic killing of Palestinians is like posting about the deaths of Nat Turner's victims while having said nothing about the violence of slavery.
If I can just comment on that, that's exactly what Garrison decried.
Right.
The hypocrites.
Yeah.
The hypocrites who shed these crocodile tears for the Israelis and not a word
Right.
for the Palestinians.
And I also, on a similar note, wrote, imagine condemning Nat Turner, never having condemned slavery. That's every single person who has condemned Hamas and never condemned the blockade. And imagine never having criticized slavery until after you condemn Turner and then pretending that you care about Black lives. That's all the gaslighters pretending to care about Palestinian lives who literally never mentioned Gaza, Palestine, or Palestinians until after October 7th.